running this interview on my blog, Introscope. Now, this series is called the Personal Branding Series, and I'm talking to people who are accomplished in their walk of life, who have achieved a lot of things along in their careers, and I want them to share what have they kind of felt about personal branding, how they have gone about their journey. So that's really broadly what the interview is. So thank you again for taking the time. For the benefit of readers, if you could kindly just give a couple of lines about your background and what you do. I know you're an author, you currently work in Gutenberg, but apart from that.
Yeah, so I guess I would kind of describe myself as a corporate storyteller, um, an author, a book club curator,
Mhm.
and a guide on city walks. So
Okay.
these are the four very diverse things that I'm known for, and possibly in that order as well, the order in which
Okay.
I told it to you, you know?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Great. So that's interesting because what I look when I looked at your profile, it seems like you have kind of reinvented yourself in many ways, right? So to begin with, if you can just describe, according to you, what does personal branding mean? So how do you define it?
So I think that corporate branding has different aspects to it, I think. So
I'm
I
going to
think,
be making notes while we go along, so don't
yeah,
mind that.
yeah, sure. So I think one is what you live in your life.
Okay.
I think that's a very, very important part of, corporate branding because it's really what you do every day.
Mm,
So I think that uh, that for me is irreplaceable. So it is about, for instance, going out and telling corporate stories every day and doing that very well. It
okay.
is about being an author and writing books and
Mm,
doing that well. Or it is about curating book clubs. It is about doing city walks.
got it.
Yeah, there are these things that you actually have to go and do well. So, for
Right.
instance, if you look at my role as a writer, if
Mm-hmm.
I were to stop writing books,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the branding on there becomes less strong. So you have
Right.
to keep doing these things, I think, in the real world. I think that's a very important part of it. Two,
Okay.
I think it's the messaging that goes out from you on different social platforms.
Right.
Social platforms and in the real world, because I think today there's a huge emphasis on what happens on social platforms, but I
Right.
think what happens in the real world is equally important
True.
because brands cannot exist on social platforms irrespective of what you're doing in the real world. So I think
Got
there
it.
has to be that kind of a tie-up and a
Got
connect.
it. Got it. Okay. Fantastic. And so I'm assuming you consider yourself as a personal brand in your own right. So how, if I would ask you, how would you know that, so based on, like you mentioned, the offline and social media world, how do you gauge that, how do you know that you are a personal brand? What are those signs or what are those indications people have given you or you have felt?
So I think one is, I think when people itself recognize you for being associated with that brand. I think that's an important thing. So what by that what I mean is when people think of a corporate storyteller, the first
Mhm.
person that they think of that they would like to go to is me. Or if they think of an author, the
Right.
first person that they think of is me. So that is the success, I think, of your personal brand.
Okay.
How you define it is by the volumes. I think it's not enough for one or two people to know that. I
Mm.
think you've got to build that base so that it's an industry recognition
Got it.
in a sense. So I think that, in a sense, is what personal branding is really.
Okay. So if I were to, ask you to reflect on
When
your journey,
uh,
uh,
when they need, and you are the person that they go to. When they need a corporate storyteller, you are the
mm,
person that when they turn to you for advice, when they
mm,
turn to you for mentoring, when your opinion and the way that you do work is actually able to influence things, I think
mm,
that's when you know that you're a personal brand.
got it. Okay. So you're talking of influence, you're talking of opinion, you're talking of how people
Yes.
reach out for advice. Okay. So if I were to ask you, in your journey, as you have gone about your work in your career and your, professional pursuits, what were some of those conscious steps you did to go about building your personal brand? So was it conscious or was it unconscious? How did it work out for you?
So I think for me, in honesty, it was more unconscious. I don't know. I think that for the first part of my journey was really defining what are the things that I would like to be associated with.
Okay.
And then it was continuing to do work in those areas. So it was very much, in my case, about actually being there and doing work on the ground. I think it was about that. And then amplifying that work through more channels. So actually doing that work was a very important part of the story for me.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So, but was there any specific steps? So, if you now reflect on your journey, were there any specific steps? Like you said, define your who you are and what you want to be associated with. That is one step. So, what would have been the next, levels which you kind of thought of?
So I think, okay, so one is identifying which are the areas that you would like to be known for, right? Like I said. The
Yeah.
second thing was doing work in that area and trying to ensure that each thing that you do is one step bigger in a sense. So for instance, let's say, you start out with a book that initially is set in the landscape of Bangalore, right? It's a work of fiction. Then the next step was to, let's say, collaborate with a couple of journalist friends, bring our combined brand together, and talk about stories in terms of Bangalore.
Got it. Okay.
The next bigger step was, let's say, when I decided to do a work on cinema and to look at Aamir Khan as a brand and analyze that story. So the point that I'm making is each time the project, in a sense, becomes bigger. And then what follows is just amplifying the work that you're doing, right? So I think the amplifying the work that you're doing happens. I think it's about setting bigger goals and projects for yourself and taking that to fruition. I think that's the bigger part of personal branding that sometimes people ignore.
Got it. Okay. Yes. And so, if I were to ask you, what are those attributes of your personal brand? So, how do people associate you? What are those keywords they use, or what do they describe you if they were to kind of talk about your personal brand?
So I think that, I think the thing of corporate storyteller that I use is something that's more, is more, it's more subliminal. I don't think if, people associate me with the work, but if you ask them about it, they wouldn't say corporate storyteller. I don't think that's the first thing that they associate me with. I think the first thing they associate me with is being an author.
Okay.
I think that's the branding that's really, really strong. And I think that the second thing that the second thing that's strong is, again, a book club curator. I think that's something that people kind of associate me with. And the third is a guide, a guide on city walks. I think that's the third thing that is fairly strong.
Got it. So, I mean, so these are really, uh, professional work which you do. But if they were attributes, is it courage? Is it attention for detail? Is it, so what are those kind of, the personality attributes that people associate you with?
Yeah, so I think the thing that people associate me with, I think, is the ability to really get to the heart of the matter.
Okay.
And there's a certain authenticity that they associate with my voice. So I think that, uh, if you want to somebody to really get to the heart of what the particular issue is, to put that down and then to build it up with research, to create a story then finally that's authentic. I think these are the things that I'm primarily associated with.
Okay. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was looking for. So great, fantastic. And on you, in your journey, in your what you have seen around you, observation. So who, according to you, is a personal brand? So again, I'm not talking of the Aamir Khans of the world. I'm not looking at celebrities, but around you, people you have been working with. Who are those one or two people whom you can name as personal brands?
So again, I think that again the way things work today, right, is
Mm,
I think it's kind of different on different platforms.
mm. Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's kind of different. So I think that, and then there's also the people who come out generally in terms of the industry and the real world and the work that you do there, right? So I
Mm,
think it's different on different platforms. I think in terms of comms, I think that somebody who I see as a personal brand is Melissa Arulpan. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yes.
see
Oh, yeah.
her. I see her as a personal brand, and I feel how she has built that brand is really by doing things for the larger fraternity that she's a part of. So
Mm,
if you look at the PR talks that they do and things like that, I
right.
think it's about
Yeah,
more about things in the real world. I think I see her as a good brand.
yes.
Uh, in terms of if you look at LinkedIn,
Mm,
now here I'm talking again of someone who may not have come with a celebrity background to start out with,
mm.
someone we all know, but who's built a huge brand for himself. I think is Karthik Srinivasan.
Got it. Okay.
I think
Yeah.
uh, I think he is definitely a personal brand. Because people in the industry who've never really worked with him, uh, his views matter to them. They listen to
Mm,
what he's saying with interest. So I think on LinkedIn, he's definitely a personal brand.
great.
In terms of Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
there's somebody who I work with personally, who I believe is a personal brand simply because I think she built that connect and all of that on her own. She was initially she just worked on social media for a company, then she moved into consultancy mode and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So her name is Ranjani. I
Okay.
think Ranjani is a tremendous. She has a huge following on Twitter, and it's something she built
What's the
up.
full name? Ranjani.
Ranjani Krishna Kumar.
Okay.
So I think just as an individual, she built it up, and it's something that sometimes brands have wanted to work with her to
Mm,
kind of leverage that brand. But I don't
yes.
think it's something that she's still maintained just as her own brand,
Mm,
and she's very very specific about the authenticity that
mm.
kind of goes with that brand. So I think.
Got it.
That's something that's and in terms of Facebook, I
Mm,
think that somebody who I think was somebody who I looked up to actually as a
mm,
tremendous personal brand was my uncle.
mm,
So his name was Roy Daniels,
mm.
and he was in the old days he was really an advertising professional, but I
Okay.
think during the last few years, till the time of his death, actually, what he did was he got into writing on social media on
Okay.
different things that kind of he felt were significant and important, and he did this writing sitting in his home by
Mm-hmm.
himself in Agra.
Okay.
Now, at the time when he passed away,
Mm-hmm.
it was very interesting because people that I work with and I know personally in
Mm,
Bangalore who had never met him
mm-hmm.
were mourning his death as a personal loss simply
Okay.
because they had read his writing on Facebook, and it had inspired them and triggered thoughts in them. So I believe that is a
Mm,
wonderful and a very inspiring example of a personal brand.
mm. Brilliant. I think these are great examples. And I think you answered some of the other questions. It's about the characteristics you admire about them and some of the steps you mentioned already. So I'll skip those questions. Um, so if I were to ask you, you're doing the city walks, you're an author, a corporate storyteller. Apart from the feedback you get from people saying, yeah, we can see the impact you're making, how do you know it's working? So is there any other signs which tell you that, yeah, I'm on the right path? The areas which I identified earlier in my career are the right things which I'm doing. So how do you kind of figure that out?
So I think there are two ways. One
Hmm,
is I think when people reach out to me specifically for advice,
hmm.
guidance on how to recreate what I have done,
Okay,
and then follow it in their lives. I think that
got it.
is for me a good indication. The
Right.
second thing is when someone, for instance, takes something that I say or something that I've written
Hmm,
and shares it with the world as an insight that has impacted them. I think those are the two examples where I know that the whole personal brand element is working.
Got it. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And while you went about your journey, what were some of those challenges you faced? I'm sure in the initial part, it would have been really tough to establish yourself. So, some of the challenges you faced while you went about building your brand.
So I think the challenge that anyone faces, okay, and even like I said, it's even today, I think that's a challenge that one would still face, because see, you know uh, unless you're an Aamir Khan, or let's say you're a Priyanka Chopra, yeah, Priyanka Chopra, I mean, there's a huge following that you have
Mm,
across the world, right?
mm,
Otherwise, I think for most uh, personal brands, so to speak, that's where
mm,
the whole thing of
mm,
personal branding becomes
mm,
important, right? For
mm,
most personal brands, I
mm,
think that each time you venture into a new area,
mm,
they're the same challenges.
mm,
So for instance, let's say you're known as a writer.
mm,
Yeah? Let's say tomorrow you decide to make films.
mm.
It's a new area.
Correct. Yeah.
you know or let's say even platforms.
Mm,
Let's say I have a large following on, let's say, Facebook, like for instance, any of the others who I mentioned as personal brands, right?
right.
So I mentioned my uncle who had a huge following on Facebook. I mentioned Ranjani, who had a
Mm,
following on Twitter. Now if they
mm,
try to interchange, the
mm.
new platform is still a challenge. They have to build from
Right.
scratch.
Okay. Got it.
you know so I think that the first thing I think that any personal brand faces is the whole first mover advantage,
Mm,
because you are coming into a space where you are new. So
mm,
how do you connect with people? How do you build a large base of followers?
mm,
And how are you respected and valued for your views?
mm.
I think that is a challenge that you face, no matter how established you are. No, when you're going into a new area, that's a challenge you face. How you would overcome that, and I think this is important. I think one is to consistently engage and speak. I
Mm.
think in the area that you choose, I think
Got
that
it.
is extremely important, to
Sure.
consistently engage and speak, even on days when you're getting no response.
Mm,
I think it's
mm,
important. And I
mm,
mean, we see this in other spheres too. Like, for instance,
mm,
today in Bangalore,
mm,
we have a lot of stand up comedians who are very well known on the stand
mm,
up comic circuit. But
mm,
if you look
mm,
at their history, for instance, there were times where many of them stood in empty rooms
mm,
and
mm,
addressed empty rooms every day as a discipline. So I think the
mm.
thing of just doing something consistently is important.
Got it.
The second thing that is very important is also connecting, I feel. Because I
Mm,
think sometimes you build yourself by
mm.
building others.
Right.
So I think you should never lose sight of that as well. One is to continuously engage, but then also to connect.
Mm. Got
I
it.
think that's, yeah.
Great. And so while you went about your journey, so what are some of the things you gained or lost? I mean, when I say gained or lost, of course, building a personal brand or following your personal pursuits means that you need to either give up something or accommodate something else. And so there are things which you may have gained or lost. So how would you put that? So what are some of the things you felt that you know, you had to give up, or something which you gained along the journey?
So I think the primary thing I think that I gained was a sense of self-belief.
Hmm.
So this belief, this this thing to believe in yourself, no matter what anybody else thinks, because finally it's what you believe that's important. So that sense of conviction, I think, is
Mm.
what I really gained.
Okay.
And I think what I lost was fear.
Yeah.
The fear of what people would think of you. I think you just have to lose that. You just have to be yourself, do your thing, and yeah, when it has to work, it will, But it's, yeah. So I think that those are the primary things.
Great. And if you were to advise someone who's, just starting out, thinking about their personal brand from scratch, so what is that first step he or she must do or take?
You have to be out there. It can't just be a desire. You have to actually go and do something. You
Okay.
know, do something and also do it consistently, irrespective of whether it's a huge hit initially. You have to persist. So I think the first step is to actually do something and then to persist for uh, a fair amount of time. I don't think that at the same time when I say persist, I don't mean like for a decade, even if there's if nothing is working, because then clearly there's something that you have to do differently. So also figuring that out.
Okay.
But the most important thing is first to just go there, do something, and then persist with it. I think, yeah.
Okay, cool. And so if you reflect on your personal brand and over the many years, so if you were to change something, which and in the way you build your brand, what would that be?
I think there are two things that I would definitely do. I think one is, okay, so one is I would write more.
Okay.
I think that in terms of the books that I've done, I mean, I know I have more stories to tell. I know I have, more that I want to talk about. So I would write more. I think that's something that I would have liked to do differently. The second thing, I think, because I've relied too much, I think, on the success of an old book. You know, I'll do it my way. What has been written some time ago. So I think, but it did well. So, but I've relied a lot on that success. So I would write more. The second thing I think is also, uh, I think I've, it's important to have the first mover advantage. So by that, what I mean is, I think that I focused on certain platforms, let's say. So the real world, I've done a lot of, a lot of my content actually is actually posted on Facebook. It's not posted so much on LinkedIn or Twitter. So I've probably been almost absent there. So I would have engaged in more channels earlier. I think those are two things that I would have possibly done.
More channels. Okay, cool. And if I were to ask you, what's your, if in a sentence, what's your recipe for, personal branding success? If you were to kind of define that, what would that be? That mantra for personal branding success?
It would be stay relevant.
Okay.
And be authentic.
Okay. Great. Yeah. I like the short and succinct summary of that. That's great. And so you already mentioned some of the personal brands you follow. And what are some of the things you learned when you observe them? So is it about their ability to, like you mentioned, connect, or is it what are those, like you mentioned some of the names, Karthik and Melissa and others? What did you learn from their journey or the way they have gone about building their brand?
Yeah. So I think from my uncle, I think what I learned to do is tell a story. I think he was a fabulous storyteller, So I think whenever I look at how a story is told, he'll always be my benchmark. In terms of Ranjini and Melissa, I think what I really like about them is I don't know how much their focus has actually been on building their personal brand as such. I think it's been more about building others. And in that process, they've actually built their personal brand. So I think that's wonderful. In terms of Karthik Srinivasa, I think he's somebody who's actually gone out there and tried to build a personal brand and been successful. I think what I really appreciate, or rather what I learned from him, I think, is it's sometimes not about it's not so much about uh, saying a whole lot and then having a huge amount, like a radio silence after that. It's more about quick insights and engaging consistently. So that was something that I think that's something that he does well, and that's something that one can.
Correct. Okay, brilliant. And so again, currently we are obviously going through a pandemic and there's crises around the world. Now, as a personal brand, what is your sense of when crisis happens? Do personal brands pause what they're saying or rethink their strategy of how they want to do it? So what is your what steps should personal brands take in such scenarios?
So I think the thing that I said as my motto, right, I think is very, very relevant in these times. Because I think, especially during a pandemic like this, it's important for your communication to be relevant. And it's also important for it to be authentic or real. You know, you have to be relevant to what's happening. You can't be completely divorced from it. But at the same time, it's important to be empathetic. It's important to be real. So I think the two things that I said, which is stay relevant and like be authentic, it's extremely important now. Probably more important than ever before.
Great. Okay. That's great. Thank you, Christina. Any last thoughts or any other opinion you have on personal brands per se? In fact, I had already interviewed Karthik, and his interview is also lined up. So any other thoughts you have about personal branding overall?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything that I had in mind. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's good. But I must say, I mean, it's good to actually talk to you, because I don't know if you recollect, but many years ago when I worked in Wipro, we actually
Yes.
did a case study on Channel W. I don't know if you recollect this.
Yes. Yes. On the intranet, right?
Yes,
Something on
yes,
the intranet.
yes,
Yes. Yes. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Yeah. That I have also been following your work, and I've been quite impressed by what you do, and that's the reason I felt you'd be a great candidate for this interview series.
Wonderful. Thank you. And it's
Thank
good
you.
to
Yeah.
finally speak with you and, yeah, get
It's a
in.
pleasure. So thank you again for taking the time. Appreciate it. I'll send the transcript over to you, and then this video file will be hosted on my blog, and then I'll share it around. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.